The coffee in my travel mug had gone cold 3 hours ago, but I kept sipping it anyway. Anything to stay awake during the drive home from Mercy General. 28 years old, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept more than 4 hours straight. Double shifts were killing me slowly, but the student loan statements didn't care about my exhaustion. 2 in the morning. The parking lot stretched out empty and dark, except for the yellow security lights that barely worked half the time. My Honda was parked in the back corner where I'd left it 16 hours earlier. 16 hours of blood, screaming, a cardiac arrest in Bay 3, and an 8-year-old with a broken arm who wouldn't stop crying for his mother. I wanted my bed more than I wanted to breathe. I was halfway across the asphalt when I heard the voices. Angry, male, speaking a language that wasn't English. My hand tightened on my keys automatically, that instinct every woman learns about parking lots at night kicking in hard. I should have turned around. Should have gone back inside and asked security to walk me out. Instead, I froze. The voices came from behind a black van near the east exit. More than 2 men. Maybe 4 or 5. One of them laughed, sharp and cruel. Another responded with something that sounded like a command. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. My heart stopped. Actually stopped for a full second before slamming back into rhythm so hard it hurt. I dove behind the nearest vehicle, a delivery truck with mud splattered across its sides. My knees hit concrete and pain shot up my thighs, but I bit down on my lip to keep from making a sound. My phone was in my hand. I needed to call 911. Needed to get help. Needed to do anything except crouch here like a terrified animal. The first gunshot made me drop the phone. It clattered against the ground, screen side down, and I watched in horror as the camera flash went off. Once. Twice. The sound was swallowed by more gunshots, a rapid succession that echoed off the buildings around us like thunder. I grabbed the phone with shaking hands, pressed it against my chest, and squeezed my eyes shut. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not at the hospital where I worked. The shooting stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the space, heavy and wrong. I could hear my own breathing, too loud, too fast. Someone was walking, boots on concrete, getting closer. I pressed myself flatter against the truck's tire, making myself as small as possible. If they found me, I was dead. I knew that with absolute certainty. Whatever had just happened wasn't something that left witnesses alive. A car door slammed, an engine started. Tires squealed as the vehicle peeled out of the parking lot at high speed, the sound fading into the distance. I stayed frozen for another full minute, counting my heartbeats, before I dared to look. The van was still there. The area around it was empty now. But even from this distance, I could see dark shapes on the ground that hadn't been there before. 6 of them, not moving. I ran. My legs barely worked. I stumbled twice before I reached my car, fumbled with the keys so badly I dropped them, scooped them up with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The engine started on the 3rd try. I reversed out of the space too fast, nearly hit a light pole, corrected, and drove toward the exit on the opposite side of the lot from where the bodies lay. I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. If I looked, it would become real, and I needed it to not be real for just a little bit longer. The drive to my apartment took 12 minutes. I don't remember a single second of it. One moment I was leaving the hospital. The next I was sitting in my parking space with the engine still running, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. There was no blood on them. I'd expected blood. But my scrubs were clean, my hands were clean, and the only evidence that anything had happened was the phone sitting in my cup holder with its cracked screen. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The screen lit up, showing the lock screen photo of me and my sister Mia from 2 years ago, before she'd left to backpack across Asia, before our parents had died in that car accident, before I'd become this hollow thing that worked 80-hour weeks because going home to an empty apartment was worse than exhaustion. There were photos in my gallery, new ones. I opened the app with a sense of dread. The first image was blurry, just dark pavement and the edge of a tire. The second was clearer, too clear. I could see faces, men in dark clothing standing in a circle. One of them was holding a gun. Another was on his knees, The third photo showed the moment after, captured in stark detail by my phone's flash. I was going to be sick. I made it to my bathroom just in time, heaving into the toilet until there was nothing left. My body shook so violently I had to sit on the floor, pressing my back against the cold tile wall, trying to remember how to breathe normally. I should call 911. Should report what I saw. Should do something other than sit here falling apart. But every time I reached for my phone, I saw those faces again. Saw the casual way they'd executed those men. Saw how efficiently they'd worked. Like this was something they'd done 100 times before. If I called the police, they'd want me to identify the shooters. They'd want me to testify. And the men who did this would know that I'd seen them. They'd come looking for me. I stayed on the bathroom floor until sunrise, watching the light slowly creep across the tiles, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, that it had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination, brought on by too many double shifts and not enough sleep. Then my phone buzzed with a news alert. 6 bodies found in Mercy General Hospital parking lot. Police investigating. No witnesses have come forward. No witnesses. Because anyone smart enough to witness what I'd seen was smart enough to know that coming forward was suicide. I deleted the photos. My hands shook so badly it took 3 tries, but I deleted every single one. Then I emptied the trash. Then I turned off my phone completely and shoved it under the couch cushions like that would somehow make everything go away. It didn't work. Nothing worked. I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every car that drove past my building made my heart race. By the second day, I'd convinced myself that they knew. Somehow they knew I'd been there. They were coming for me. When someone knocked on my door at 3 p.m, I nearly crawled out of my skin. I looked through the peephole with my whole body tense to run. 2 people stood in the hallway. A man and a woman, both wearing dark suits and expressions that said federal agent more clearly than any badge could. The woman held up identification anyway. FBI. I opened the door because what else could I do? Running would only make things worse. They knew. Of course they knew. The hospital had security cameras in the parking lot. They'd seen me there. Seen me witness the massacre. Seen me run. What they told me was somehow worse than anything I'd imagined. The 6 men who died were mid-level players in a territory dispute. The shooters were Bratva, Russian organized crime with connections that reached into local police departments, the DA's office, and places the female agent didn't name but implied were everywhere that mattered. I was the only witness. The only person who'd seen the faces of the men responsible. The only person who could identify them. And they had a photo. My phone had automatically backed up to the cloud before I'd deleted everything. The FBI had accessed it through a warrant. They had evidence that could bring down 8 members of the Bratva's East Coast operation. All they needed was for me to stay alive long enough to testify. The male agent, Morrison, explained WITSEC like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. New identity, new location, complete severing of all ties to my current life. No contact with anyone I knew, including family. 6 months in protective custody until the federal trial. Then, if I survived, a permanent new life somewhere far away from here. The female agent asked about my family. Close friends. Romantic relationships. Anyone who would notice if I disappeared. I told her my parents had died 5 years ago. My sister was backpacking through Asia, and we only talked maybe once every 2 months through spotty Wi-Fi connections. My closest friend from nursing school had moved to Seattle last year. I worked so much I barely had time for a social life. The agent nodded like this was good news. Like being alone made me the perfect candidate for vanishing. They gave me 4 hours to decide. 4 hours to choose between testifying and spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Or refusing and likely ending up as dead as the 6 men in that parking lot. I thought about my sister. About never seeing her again. About becoming someone else. Somewhere else. With no past and no connections to anything real. Then I thought about those men kneeling on the concrete. About the casual way their executioners had pulled the triggers. About how many other people they'd killed, would kill, if someone didn't stop them. I called the agents back in 3 hours. Told them yes. Told them I'd testify. Told them to do whatever they needed to do to keep me alive that long. I didn't ask what whatever they needed meant. I should have. because 2 days later, I died in a car accident on the interstate. At least that's what the news reported. That's what everyone would believe. Hannah Carter, 28, nurse at Mercy General Hospital. No immediate family, no service planned. Cremated remains scattered according to her wishes. I watched my own death announcement on a laptop in a FBI safe house and wondered if this was what ghosts felt like. They gave me a choice of what to wear for my own death. Black jeans or gray ones. A green sweater or a cream-colored cardigan. Like it mattered what a corpse would be dressed in when the car exploded. I chose the jeans I'd bought 3 months ago and the sweater Mia had sent me from Thailand last Christmas. If I was going to disappear, I wanted to take something of her with me, even if it was just fabric and memories. The FBI had everything planned down to the minute. Agent Morrison drove while I sat in the passenger seat of a Honda identical to mine, watching the highway lights blur past. It was just after midnight. They'd chosen this time deliberately. Fewer witnesses, less traffic to worry about, cleaner. We drove for 40 minutes before Morrison pulled onto the shoulder of Interstate 90, about 3 miles from the state line. Another vehicle was already waiting, lights off, barely visible in the darkness. Morrison killed the engine and turned to look at me. "Last chance to back out," he said. His face was all hard angles in the dashboard light, but his eyes were almost kind. Almost. "Once we do this, Hannah Carter is gone. Forever. You understand that?" I understood. I'd spent the last 3 days understanding it. 3 days of FBI agents asking me the same questions over and over. 3 days of learning how to be Sarah Mitchell, complete with a social security number, a fabricated work history, and a birth certificate from a hospital in Idaho that had burned down 20 years ago. All the lies were easier to maintain when the source documents were ash. "I understand," I said. Morrison nodded once, sharp and final. "Then get in the other car. Don't look back at this one. Don't watch. Just get in and wait." I did what he said, climbed out of my death car and into the black SUV 50 feet away. The door closed behind me with a heavy thunk that sounded too much like a coffin lid. The driver didn't speak, didn't even look at me, just kept his eyes fixed forward while his hands rested loose on the steering wheel. Through the tinted rear window, I could see Morrison working. He'd pulled something from the trunk. The other agents, 3 of them, were positioning what looked like a mannequin in the driver's seat of the Honda. No, not a mannequin. A body. The Jane Doe they'd told me about. A woman who'd died 3 days ago from an overdose in some motel room downtown. No family. No one to claim her. No one who would miss her. She was going to be me now. Forever. I wanted to throw up again. But my stomach was already empty. I'd barely eaten in 3 days. The explosion, when it came, was quieter than I expected. A dull crump that made the SUV shake slightly. Then fire, bright orange against the black sky, consuming the Honda in seconds. The heat was so intense I could feel it through the SUV's windows even from this distance. Morrison ran back toward us, jumped into the passenger seat. "Go, now." We drove. I watched the flames shrink in the side mirror until they were just a glow on the horizon. Then nothing at all. Somewhere behind us, a state trooper was probably already calling it in. Car fire on Interstate 90. Single occupant. Identification would take time because of the damage, but eventually they'd match dental records to Hannah Carter. Eventually I'd be declared dead. The drive to Montana took 11 hours. We stopped once at a rest area where Morrison bought me a coffee I couldn't taste and a sandwich I couldn't swallow. He didn't try to make conversation, just handed me a manila folder with my new life inside and told me to memorize everything before we arrived. Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, born in Boise, Idaho, parents deceased, no siblings, worked as a medical transcriptionist before deciding to take a sabbatical, liked hiking and reading, preferred tea over coffee, had never been to the East Coast. All lies. All necessary. The safe house was exactly as remote as Morrison had promised. 40 minutes past the last town that could reasonably be called a town, down a dirt road that turned to mud in places, surrounded by pine trees so thick they blocked out half the sky. The house itself was small, but newer than I expected. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living room with a wood-burning stove. The only decorations were generic landscape prints that could have come from any furniture store clearance section. "You'll have supplies delivered every Tuesday," Morrison explained, showing me where they'd stocked the pantry and freezer. "Someone will come by to check the generator every other week. I'll visit twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays, unless there's an emergency. You have my emergency number. Don't use it unless you absolutely have to." He showed me the panic button hidden under the kitchen counter, the reinforced door in the bedroom closet that led to a tunnel, the go bag packed with cash, documents, and a handgun I'd never fired. 6 months, he said. "That's all. Trial's scheduled for late June. You testify, we move you somewhere permanent, and this is all over. 6 months. It sounded like nothing and everything at the same time. He left before sunrise. I watched his headlights disappear down the dirt road, and then I was alone. Completely, utterly alone, in a way I'd never been before. The first week was the worst. I'd wake up disoriented, reaching for my phone before remembering I didn't have one anymore. Didn't have anything that connected me to my real life. No social media. No email. No way to contact Mia and tell her I was okay, that I was alive, that she shouldn't worry when she eventually heard about the accident. She was somewhere in Vietnam now. Or maybe Cambodia. We'd talked 6 weeks ago through a crackling video call. She'd been tan and happy, showing me the hostel where she was staying, talking about some Australian guy she'd met. I'd told her I loved her, and to be safe. I'd had no idea those would be the last words I'd ever say to her as myself. The guilt ate at me worse than the loneliness. She'd find out through someone at the hospital, probably. One of my coworkers would track her down somehow, send her a message. "Your sister died in a car accident. I'm so sorry." And Mia would come home for a funeral that wouldn't happen, for a body that wasn't mine, and she'd grieve for me while I sat in Montana learning how to be someone else. Morrison said it was necessary, said that if the Bratva even suspected I was alive, they'd go after anyone connected to me, including my sister, especially my sister. Keeping her in the dark kept her safe. I tried to believe that, tried to make it true through sheer force of will. The days blurred together into a routine that was both comforting and suffocating. I woke at dawn because there was nothing else to do. Made coffee I drank alone at a kitchen table built for 4. Read books from the limited selection they'd provided, all paperbacks with the covers torn off to remove any identifying store stickers. Walked the perimeter of the property, counting my steps because otherwise I'd lose track of time entirely. Morrison visited like clockwork, Mondays and Thursdays at 10 in the morning. He'd bring fresh supplies, newspapers with certain articles circled in red pen so I could keep track of the case building against the Bratva. 8 members arrested so far, 3 still at large. Trial date confirmed for June 23rd. He'd ask me questions to keep my memory sharp, make sure I could still identify faces from the photos, still remember the sequence of events exactly as they'd happened. He was professional, thorough, and about as warm as the Montana winter settling in around us. Snow came in November and didn't stop. Some days it fell so thick I couldn't see the tree line from the kitchen window. The world became nothing but white and gray, and the dark shapes of pines bending under the weight of ice. I started talking to myself, just to hear a human voice. Started naming the deer that would occasionally wander past the house. Started counting the hours between Morrison's visits and hating how relieved I felt when his truck finally appeared on the road. This wasn't living. It was existing. Waiting. Being a ghost who still had to eat and sleep and wake up every morning with nothing to do but survive until June. But I'd made this choice. Signed the papers. Watched my own death burn on a highway while a stranger took my place in the flames. There was no going back now. Hannah Carter was dead and buried in a cemetery I'd never see. And Sarah Mitchell had 6 months to learn how to breathe in a body that felt less real every single day. 6 months. 180 days of existing in a house that smelled like pine needles and propane. I'd marked each one on the calendar Morrison had given me, crossing off the squares with a pen that was running out of ink. June 23rd circled in red. The trial date. The day I could start becoming human again. Morrison was supposed to arrive at 9. He was never late. Not once in 6 months had he missed a visit or shown up even 5 minutes past the hour. So when 9:15 came and went with no sound of tires on the dirt road, I knew something was wrong. By 9:30, my hands were shaking. I stood at the kitchen window, staring at the empty driveway, trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Flat tire, traffic, some kind of delay that had nothing to do with the fact that 8 men wanted me dead and had resources that reached into places Morrison had assured me were secure. The emergency phone rang at 9:47. I grabbed it on the first ring, my heart already racing. "Miss Mitchell, this is Supervisor Chen from the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The voice was male, clipped, professional. "I'm calling to inform you that Agent Morrison was found deceased approximately 3 hours ago. We're dispatching an extraction team to your location. They'll arrive via helicopter in 30 minutes. Pack only essentials. Do you understand?" The phone slipped in my suddenly sweaty grip. Morrison was dead. Morrison, who'd sat at my kitchen table twice a week for 6 months. Who'd brought me books and newspapers and reminded me that the world still existed outside these walls. Who'd promised me that if I just held on until June, I'd get my life back. "How did he die?" My voice didn't sound like mine. "I'm not at liberty to discuss that over an unsecured line. The extraction team will brief you. 30 minutes, Miss Mitchell. Be ready." He hung up before I could ask anything else. I stood there holding the dead phone, my brain trying to process what this meant. Morrison was my only contact with the outside world. The only person who knew where I was, besides whoever else was involved in WITSEC. If he was dead, if someone had gotten to him, then they knew about me, knew where I was, knew everything. I moved on autopilot, grabbing the go bag from the bedroom closet. It was already packed with clothes, cash, fake IDs, and the handgun I still didn't know how to use properly. My hands fumbled with the zipper. 3 hours ago, the supervisor had said. Morrison had been found 3 hours ago. Something about that timing scraped against my brain wrong. I went to the window that faced east, the direction Morrison always came from, the direction the helicopter should come from if they were flying from the nearest FBI field office. I waited, straining my ears for the sound of rotor blades cutting through mountain air. At 10:12, I heard it. Distant but growing louder. A helicopter, just like the supervisor had promised. But the sound was coming from the west, from the wrong direction entirely. Every instinct Morrison had drilled into me over 6 months screamed at once. Wrong approach, wrong timing, wrong everything. I didn't think. Thinking would have frozen me. I grabbed the go bag, ran to the bedroom, shoved the window open, and climbed through. The cold Montana morning hit my face like a slap. I could hear the helicopter getting closer, the thump, thump, thump of blades echoing off the mountains. The garage sat 30 yards from the house, half hidden by pine trees. Morrison had shown it to me during the first week, had made me memorize where the keys to the old Chevy pickup were kept. "Always in the ignition," he'd said, "in case you need to run and can't wait for help." I ran. The frozen ground crunched under my feet. The helicopter sound was deafening now, close, maybe right overhead. I didn't look up. I hit the garage door, yanked it open, threw myself into the truck. The engine turned over on the second try, loud and rough. I reversed out fast enough to clip the garage door frame. Didn't care. Aimed for the maintenance road that curved away from the house through the trees. In the rearview mirror, I saw the helicopter descending toward the clearing. It was black, unmarked, and there were people rappelling down before it even touched ground. I drove faster than I should have on a dirt road covered in ice and dead pine needles. The truck fishtailed twice, but I kept control, kept moving, kept putting distance between myself and whatever was happening at that house. 2.5 miles to the highway. Morrison had measured it, had driven it with me once to show me the route. The highway was empty when I reached it. I turned right without knowing why, just following some instinct that said go, move, don't stop. A gas station appeared after another mile, one of those ancient single-pump places that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. A semi-truck sat beside the diesel pump, engine idling. I pulled up next to it, killed the Chevy's engine, and knocked on the driver's side door. The trucker who opened it was maybe 60, with a graying beard and suspicious eyes. He looked me over, taking in my wild hair, my lack of a jacket, the panic that must have been written all over my face. "You okay, miss? I need a ride." The words came out too fast. "Please, I'll pay you." I just need to get to the nearest town. He studied me for another long moment. I watched him decide. Saw the moment his suspicion shifted into something that might have been pity, or might have been recognition that whatever I was running from was real. Get in. I'm heading to Billings. That work for you? I nodded and climbed up into the cab before he could change his mind. The truck pulled back onto the highway with a grinding of gears, and I watched through the side mirror as the gas station disappeared behind us. 45 minutes to Billings, he said. 45 minutes to figure out what to do next. I'd left my phone in the safe house. Left everything except the go bag. But I had cash, and I had Morrison's training rattling around in my head. Things he'd taught me that I'd thought were paranoid at the time. How to spot a tail. How to use public computers without leaving traces. How to access the dark web if I ever needed to. The trucker didn't ask questions. Didn't even ask my name. Just drove in silence while talk radio played low from the dashboard. By the time we reached Billings, I'd made my decision. He dropped me at a busy intersection downtown. I thanked him, pressed $200 into his hand even though he tried to refuse, and watched him drive away. Then I started walking. I found what I needed 3 blocks later. A place called Internet Oasis Cafe, wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat. The kind of place that charged by the hour and didn't care who you were as long as you paid in cash. The kid behind the counter barely looked up when I handed him $20. He pointed me to a terminal in the back corner, away from the windows. Perfect. I sat down and my hands were shaking again. I had to Google how to access a VPN, because Morrison's instructions had been verbal, and my memory was scattered from adrenaline. But I got it working eventually. Routed my connection through 3 different countries like he'd shown me. Then I went looking for information about Morrison. The news hit me like a physical blow. Federal agent found dead in vehicle. Apparent homicide. Execution-style shooting. Body discovered at 8 this morning. 8. Not 3 hours before the supervisor had called me. 8 hours. Someone had waited 5 hours to tell me. Had given whoever killed Morrison plenty of time to get to Montana. To get to me. The FBI had a leak. Or worse, the FBI was compromised at a level that made Morrison's death and my near-death not a failure of security, but something deliberate. I was on my own, completely alone with a target on my back and nowhere to go. That's when I remembered Morrison mentioning the dark web forums where criminals traded information, where bounties were posted, where people like the Bratva operated in the open because law enforcement couldn't touch them there. It took me another 20 minutes to find the right form. Another 10 to navigate to the section where bounties and contracts were listed. And there, posted 6 days ago, was my name. Not Sarah Mitchell, Hannah Carter. The post was simple. $5 million for information leading to the individuals responsible for Hannah Carter's death. Another $5 million for proof of their elimination, posted by someone with the username CostaLord22. No photo of me, but my name in full. My real name. The one that was supposed to be dead and buried. The comments underneath ran for pages. Speculation about who I'd been. Why someone was offering $10 million total for revenge on my behalf. Names thrown around, including one that appeared more than any other. Dominic Moretti. Boss of the Moretti family. East Coast territory. Known for being ruthless and methodical. Known for starting a war with the Bratva 3 months ago over some territorial dispute that had left bodies piling up on both sides. 3 months ago. Right around when my funeral would have happened. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Someone was looking for revenge for my death. Someone with the resources and the will to wage war against the Bratva. Someone who cared that Hannah Carter had died. I didn't know any Dominic Moretti. Had never heard the name before, but he knew mine, and he was the only person in the world right now who had both the power to protect me and a reason to want to. I cleared my browser history, wiped down the keyboard and mouse, and walked out of the Internet Oasis Cafe with a plan forming that was either brilliant or suicidal, probably both. I was going to find Dominic Moretti. I was going to tell him I was alive, and I was going to pray that whoever he was, whatever had made him care about a dead stranger, was enough to keep me breathing long enough to finish what I'd started. Getting back to the city took 3 days on buses that smelled like diesel and stale coffee. I used the fake emergency IDs from my go bag, paid in cash, and kept my head down. Every time someone looked at me too long, my heart would race. Every police car we passed made my palms sweat, but nobody stopped me. Nobody questioned the woman with tangled hair and exhausted eyes traveling alone across state lines. By the time I reached familiar territory, I'd been awake for close to 60 hours straight. My body wanted to collapse. My mind wouldn't let it. I found a motel on the outskirts of town, the kind that took cash and didn't ask for ID if you paid enough extra. $40 a night for a room that smelled like cigarettes and had a stain on the ceiling I tried not to think about. I spent 4 days learning how to be a ghost in my own city. Watching, waiting, trying to understand who Dominic Moretti was and why my death had mattered enough to start a war. The internet cafe visits gave me pieces. News articles about territorial disputes between the Moretti family and the Bratva. Body counts that made my stomach turn. Financial records that suggested Moretti controlled half the Port Authority and had legitimate businesses that probably weren't legitimate at all. But none of it told me why he cared about a nurse he'd never met. Except he had met me, 2 years ago in a trauma bay while he was bleeding out from 3 bullet wounds. That much I remembered, but he'd been unconscious for most of it. Barely awake when they'd wheeled him to surgery. How could that brief moment have meant anything to him? The cemetery visits were mentioned in a forum post buried deep in the dark web discussions. Someone had seen him there. Wednesdays at 7 in the morning like clockwork. Oak Hill Cemetery. No guards close. Just him and whoever was buried there. I knew who was buried there. Or rather, who wasn't. Wednesday morning came cold and gray. I arrived at Oak Hill at 6:30, when the groundskeeper was just unlocking the gates. He didn't look at me twice. Just another person visiting a dead relative before work. I walked through the rows of headstones until I found mine. Hannah Carter, beloved daughter and sister. The dates hurt to look at. The stone was simple granite, nothing fancy. The FBI had paid for it, I supposed. Or maybe Mia had, thinking she was burying her only family. Fresh roses lay across the base. White ones. They couldn't have been more than a day old. Someone had been here recently. Someone who cared enough to keep replacing them, even though the person they were mourning was standing right here breathing. I moved to the marble mausoleum 20 feet away and pressed myself against its cold side. From here, I could see my grave clearly, but stay hidden behind the structure's bulk. I waited. 7:02. A black SUV rolled through the cemetery gates, tires crunching on gravel. It stopped near the older section where my plot was. 3 men got out first, fanning into positions around the vehicle. Security. Then the 4th door opened. He was taller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just been too focused on keeping him alive to notice details like height, dark hair, dark suit, shoulders that looked like they carried weight even when he walked. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing you were the most dangerous thing in any room. Dominic Moretti didn't look at his guards. Didn't acknowledge them at all. Just walked straight to my headstone and stopped. He stood there for a long moment. Then he knelt. Right there in the damp grass in his expensive suit, like he didn't care about the mud or the cold. His hands shook slightly as he removed the old roses and set down the fresh ones. I saw his lips move, heard words in Italian carried on the morning air. Too quiet to make out clearly, but the tone was unmistakable. Grief. Raw and barely contained. Something cracked open in my chest watching him. This man mourning someone he didn't really know. This man who'd somehow made my death matter enough to wage war over it. I stepped out from behind the mausoleum before I could overthink it. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You're visiting the wrong grave. There's no one buried here." The effect was instantaneous. All 3 guards had weapons drawn before I'd finished the sentence. Dominic didn't move. Didn't turn. Just stayed kneeling with his back to me, shoulders gone rigid. Voice is wrong. His accent was thicker than I expected. Italian, maybe. Or somewhere close. Hannah Carter had a softer voice. "You're a socia, a lookalike. The Bratva sent you. You were unconscious when I spoke to you." I took another step closer. My legs wanted to shake, but I locked them. "Mercy General Hospital. Trauma Bay 3. You had 3 bullet wounds. The surgeon was delayed, so I stayed with you. I held your hand and told you that you were too stubborn to die just yet. You squeezed my hand back right before the anesthesia took you under." He turned, I watched his face go through a dozen emotions in 3 seconds. Shock first, eyes going wide like he'd been struck. Then disbelief, his mouth opening slightly like he wanted to speak but couldn't find words. Anger flashed next, fast and hot, probably at whoever had made him think I was dead. And finally, devastating relief that made his whole expression crack. 4 steps and he was in front of me. I didn't see him close the distance. One moment he was by the grave. The next his hands were on my face, large and warm and not quite gentle. His thumbs pressed against my cheekbones, fingers threading into my hair. He was testing, making sure I was real and solid and actually standing here. His eyes were the darkest brown I'd ever seen, nearly black in the morning light. They searched mine with an intensity that stole my breath. 6 months. His voice came out rough, broken. 6 months I've been coming here. I'm sorry. I didn't know. The FBI put me in witness protection. They faked my death. But there was a leak, and my handler was killed yesterday, and they tried to get me too, and I didn't know where else to go. The words tumbled out too fast. I saw your post on the dark web. The bounty on the Bratva for my death. I don't understand why you care, but I need help, and you're the only one with resources enough to... He pressed a finger against my lips, cutting me off. Then he pulled out his phone with his other hand and spoke rapid Italian to whoever answered. Commands, short and sharp. His eyes never left my face. When he ended the call, he finally released me, but only to grab my hand instead, pulling me toward the SUV. The guards had lowered their weapons but kept scanning the area with professional paranoia. We leave. Now. Not a suggestion. If you found me, the Bratva can too. They have people watching. Always watching. Wait. I need to explain. In the car. Move. He opened the back door, practically pushed me inside, climbed in after me. One of the guards was already behind the wheel. The SUV was moving before Dominic's door fully closed. I twisted to look at him in the dim interior. He was staring at me like I might disappear if he looked away. One hand still held mine, gripped tight enough to be uncomfortable. Like he was anchoring me to reality through sheer physical pressure. How long have you known? I asked. About me. About what happened that night at the hospital. His jaw clenched. A month after your accident. I was investigating the massacre on my territory. The FBI had scrubbed your records, but my people found old files. Saw your photo. I recognized you immediately. The nurse who saved my life. His thumb moved across my knuckles in an absent gesture. When I discovered you'd died in my territory, that you'd been killed because you witnessed violence in my world. He broke off, looked away. The guilt was unbearable. You saved me, and I failed to protect you. You didn't know I existed. I should have. Fierce. Angry at himself. I spent 2 years searching for you. Every hospital on the East Coast, every lead. And when I finally found you, you were already in the ground. His eyes came back to mine. Or so I believed. The Bratva stole that from me. From both of us. So I took everything from them in return. The car sped through early morning traffic, running lights that should have been red. Nobody stopped us. Nobody dared. I was in a vehicle with a crime boss and his armed guards, being taken to an unknown location. And somehow I felt safer than I had in 6 months. Maybe that made me crazy. Or maybe it just made me desperate. We drove for 20 minutes before pulling up to gates that opened automatically. A mansion appeared through morning mist, all modern lines and bulletproof glass. Armed men patrolled the grounds. Cameras tracked our vehicle. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Dominic helped me out, hand at the small of my back, guiding me toward the entrance. His touch burned through my thin jacket. You'll stay here, he said as we walked. Under my protection, until we eliminate the threat permanently. No one touches what's mine. And Hannah Carter, you've been mine since the moment you refused to let me die. The guest suite was larger than my entire apartment had been. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked grounds that seemed to stretch forever, patrolled by armed men who moved like shadows. The bed could have slept 4 people comfortably. Everything was done in shades of cream and soft gray. Expensive, but not ostentatious. Beautiful in a way that made me feel like I was dirtying it just by existing. I stood in the middle of the room for a full minute after Dominic left. trying to process the fact that this was real, that I was standing in a crime boss's mansion, under his protection, because he'd been mourning me for 6 months. A knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. A woman in her 50s entered, carrying an armful of clothes. She introduced herself as Maria, the housekeeper, and proceeded to show me where everything was. The bathroom had a tub deep enough to drown in. The closet held clothes in my exact size that definitely hadn't been there an hour ago. "How did you know what would fit?" I asked. Maria smiled. "Mr. Moretti is very thorough when he wants something done. That should have been creepy. Instead, it just felt surreal." She left me alone to shower and change. I stood under water hot enough to hurt until my skin turned pink, trying to wash away 6 months of fear and 3 days of bus travel. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that probably cost more than my monthly salary used to be, I found a tray of food waiting on the desk. Soup, bread, fruit. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten a full meal. I managed half of it before exhaustion won. The bed swallowed me whole. I was asleep in minutes. The nightmare came at 3:12 in the morning. I knew because I saw the clock when I jerked awake. Heart slamming against my ribs. Morrison's dead eyes staring at me from behind my eyelids. The house in Montana burning. The helicopter descending. Running through snow that turned to blood under my feet. I was still trying to remember how to breathe when my door opened. Dominic stood in the doorway, wearing only sleep pants, a handgun held loose at his side. His hair was messed from sleep. He took one look at me, saw whatever was written on my face, and crossed the room. "Nightmare," I managed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." He set the gun on the nightstand. "You didn't. I don't sleep well." He sat on the edge of the bed, keeping distance between us but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Tell me what you need." "I don't know." The honesty scraped out of me. "I keep seeing him. Morrison, and all the ways I almost died in the last week. You're safe here. Simple. Absolute. Like he could make it true through sheer force of will. You can't promise that. Watch me." He shifted, leaning back against the headboard, stretching his legs out on top of the covers. "I'm not leaving until you sleep. Argue if you want, but you'll lose." I should have told him to go. Should have maintained some kind of boundary. Instead, I lay back down, still on my side of the bed, and closed my eyes. His presence was solid and real next to me, proof that I wasn't alone in the dark. When I woke 6 hours later, he was gone, but I'd slept without nightmares for the first time in months. It became our routine. Every night at 3 or 3:30, I'd wake up choking on fear. Every night, Dominic would appear within minutes. Sometimes he'd talk, telling me about nothing important in that accented voice. Sometimes he'd just sit there, a silent anchor, but he always stayed until I fell back asleep. I stopped questioning it after the 3rd night. Started accepting it as fact. This was how things worked now. The days developed their own rhythm. Breakfast on the terrace if weather allowed. Coffee strong enough to strip paint. Dominic would read newspapers while I relearned how to be a person instead of a ghost. He'd tell me about developments with the Bratva, about the FBI investigation into Morrison's death, about the trial date that was now only 3 weeks away. Afternoons were for planning. We'd spread maps across the library table, marking safe houses and known Bratva locations. He taught me about his world in pieces, explaining territories and alliances like a professor lecturing on geopolitics. I taught him about trauma medicine, about triage protocols, about what it felt like to hold someone's life in your hands. Dinners were when we stopped being strategic and started being human. He asked about my parents, about Mia, about the life I'd had before everything imploded. I told him things I hadn't told anyone, about how lonely nursing had been. Working 80 hours a week because going home to silence hurt more than exhaustion, about how guilty I felt that Mia thought I was dead, that she was out there grieving while I hid. He told me about searching for me. 2 years of following dead ends, chasing leads that went nowhere, every hospital on the East Coast, every nursing registry. He'd had investigators tracking down every green-eyed brunette who'd worked ER during that time period. Why? I asked one night over wine I barely touched. You barely knew me. His fingers tightened on his glass. You treated me like a person, not a boss, not a criminal. Just someone who was hurt and scared and trying not to show it. In my world, that's rarer than you'd think." He paused. "And when I woke up after surgery, you were the first thing I looked for. But you were gone. I've been trying to find you ever since." Something in my chest cracked open at that. The touches started accidentally. Reaching for the same document, fingers brushing. Him steadying me when I tripped on the library steps. My hand on his shoulder when I leaned over to look at something on his laptop. But they started lasting longer. His hand at the small of my back when we walked became constant. My fingers on his wrist to get his attention began lingering. 2 weeks in, one of his men came back from a skirmish with the Bratva. Minor casualties. Dominic had taken a bullet to his left bicep. Just a graze, but deep enough to need stitches. He refused to go to his doctor. Said I could do it. I found myself in his bedroom, medical kit spread across his desk, while he sat shirtless in a chair that probably cost more than a car. The wound was clean, but angry, bleeding sluggishly. I cleaned it with steady hands, falling back into nurse mode automatically. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "I've had practice." I threaded the needle, leaned closer. "This will hurt. Pain and I are old friends." I made the first stitch. He didn't even flinch. I worked in silence, focusing on making each suture neat and even, but I was hyper-aware of how close we were, how his skin was warm under my gloved fingers, how he smelled like expensive soap and gunpowder and something darker underneath. "You had the same expression," he murmured. I glanced up. His eyes were on my face, not his arm. "What?" 2 years ago, in the trauma bay. You had this exact expression, completely focused, tongue between your teeth." His free hand came up, thumb brushing the corner of my mouth. "I thought I was hallucinating an angel. Then you told me I was too stubborn to die, and I knew you were real." My hands stilled. We were so close I could count his eyelashes. Could see the exact moment his gaze dropped to my lips. "Hannah." My name in his mouth sounded like a prayer, or a curse. "You should be afraid of me. Of this." "I know." I tied off the stitch, moved to the next. "But I'm not. I'm safer with you than I've been anywhere else. That probably makes me crazy." "It definitely makes you crazy." But his thumb was still tracing my jawline, gentle in a way that contradicted everything else about him. The moment broke when someone knocked sharply on the door. Business. Always business pulling him away. He stood, threw on a shirt over the fresh bandage, and was gone before I could process what had almost happened. I sat there in his bedroom for a long time after, trying to understand when exactly I'd stopped seeing Dominic Moretti as a dangerous criminal and started seeing him as just Dominic, the man who stayed up with me during nightmares, who told me stories about his mother teaching him to make pasta from scratch, who looked at me like I was something precious instead of a problem to solve. That night at dinner, I used his first name for the first time. "Dominic, can you pass the salt?" His hand froze halfway to his wineglass. His eyes snapped to mine, dark and intense. "Say it again." "What?" "My name." "Say it again." "Dominic." Softer this time. Something shifted in his expression. Heated and desperate and barely controlled. He stood abruptly, chair scraping back. For a second I thought he'd leave. Instead, he crossed to me, pulled me up by the hand. "When this is over," he said, voice rough, "when the Bratva is dealt with, and you've testified and you're finally safe, we're going to have a very long conversation about what you do to me when you say my name." Then he let me go and walked out, leaving me standing there with my heart racing and my whole world tilted on its axis. Because somewhere between Montana and here, between nightmares and breakfast conversations and stitching his wounds, I'd done the most dangerous thing possible. I'd started falling for Dominic Moretti. And from the look in his eyes, he was falling just as hard. The news came during breakfast on day 21. Dominic's phone rang while he was pouring my coffee, and I watched his expression shift from relaxed to lethal in the span of a single breath. He answered in Italian, listened for maybe 30 seconds, then ended the call without a word. "They know you're alive." He set down the coffee pot with careful precision. Too careful, like he was holding back violence. "One of my informants inside the Bratva confirmed it this morning. Security footage from that internet cafe in Billings captured your face." They've been tracking you since Montana. My stomach dropped. How long have they known? At least a week, maybe more. His jaw clenched. They're planning something. Volkov wants you dead before the trial. My informant says he's calling in every resource he has left. This won't be a small operation. I set down my fork, appetite gone. What does that mean? It means they're coming here, soon. He pulled out his phone again, started typing rapid commands. I'm increasing security. No one gets within a mile of this property without me knowing about it. How many men does he have? Too many. His eyes met mine, dark and serious, but not more than I can handle. You're safe here, Hannah. I promise you that. The word safe had lost all meaning somewhere between Montana and here, but I nodded anyway because what else could I do? By afternoon, the mansion had transformed into a military compound. I counted at least 15 additional guards patrolling the grounds. New cameras appeared on every corner. Dominic spent hours in his office coordinating with his security team, his voice a low rumble through the closed door. I hated feeling useless. Hated sitting in the guest suite while everyone else prepared for war. When Dominic finally emerged at 6, looking exhausted, I was waiting for him in the hallway. Teach me to shoot. He stopped mid-stride. What? You heard me. I'm not sitting around being protected while everyone else fights. I need to know how to defend myself. Hannah, you don't need to... Yes, I do. I stepped closer, met his eyes without flinching. If they get through your security, if something goes wrong, I won't be helpless. So either you teach me or I figure it out myself. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but close. You're serious about this? Completely. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. Tomorrow morning. 7. Don't be late. The private shooting range was tucked into the basement, soundproofed and equipped with everything from handguns to rifles. Dominic was already there when I arrived, setting up targets at the far end of the range. He'd changed into dark jeans and a fitted black shirt that did nothing to hide the way he moved. Ever fired a gun before? He asked without looking at me. Once. Morrison made me practice with the one in my go bag. I was terrible. We'll start simple. He picked up a handgun from the table, checked it with practiced efficiency, then held it out to me. Glock 19, standard issue. Good weight, reliable. I took it, feeling the cold metal settle into my palm. Heavier than I remembered. Dominic moved behind me, his chest nearly against my back. Stance first. Feet shoulder-width apart. Left foot slightly forward if you're right-handed. His hands came to my hips, adjusting my position. Heat radiated through the thin fabric of my workout clothes. That's it. Now raise the weapon. Both hands. Left supports right. I lifted the gun, trying to ignore how close he was, how I could feel his breath against my neck when he leaned in to check my grip. Fingers here. He adjusted my hold, his hands covering mine. Firm, but not tight. You're strangling it. Sorry. Don't apologize. Just relax. His voice dropped lower, mouth close to my ear. Breathe. Feel the weight. Get comfortable with it. I tried. Really tried. But having Dominic pressed against my back, his hands guiding mine, his voice washing over me, made concentration nearly impossible. Now sight down the barrel. See that target? He adjusted my arms slightly, bringing them up. Center mass. Always aim center mass. Bigger target, better chance of hitting. What if I miss? You won't. Not with me here. Absolute confidence. On 3, squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Squeeze. 1, 2, 3. I squeezed. The gun kicked back into my palms, the shot echoing despite the soundproofing. The target barely moved. I missed. Look again. I squinted at the target. There was a hole. Not center mass, but close. I hit it. You did. I could hear the smile in his voice. Again. Same stance. Remember to breathe. We spent 2 hours there. By the end, my arms ached and my ears rang despite the protection, but I could hit center mass 8 times out of 10. Dominic never moved far, always close enough to adjust my stance or grip. His touch professional, but lingering just slightly too long to be purely instructional. When we finally stopped, I set down the gun, and turned to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're a fast learner. I'm motivated." I wiped sweat from my forehead. "Thank you for teaching me, Hannah." He stepped closer, eliminating the careful distance he'd been maintaining. "If it comes to a fight, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "You run. You don't try to be a hero. You don't try to help. You take the escape route I showed you, and you run until you can't run anymore." His hand came up, cupping my jaw. "Please, I can't fight them if I'm worried about protecting you." The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in my chest. "I'll run, I promise." The days that followed were strange, tense but also oddly intimate. We fell into a rhythm that felt dangerously domestic. Morning shooting practice, afternoon strategy sessions, evening dinners where we talked about everything except the impending attack. One night, music drifted from somewhere in the mansion. Old jazz, slow and sultry. Dominic found me in the library, lost in a book I wasn't actually reading. "Dance with me." I looked up. "What?" "Dance. With me." He held out his hand. "We might not get another chance." The honesty in those words made my throat tight. I took his hand. He pulled me close in the empty library, one hand at my waist, the other clasping mine. We moved slowly to music that was barely audible, more swaying than actual dancing. His thumb traced circles on my lower back through my shirt. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "What?" "My people found the FBI leak. Agent named Richardson. He's been feeding information to the Bratva for 6 months. Sold them Morrison's location for $200,000. Rage burned hot and fast. Where is he now?" "Dealt with. Flat. Final. He won't hurt anyone else." I should have been horrified. Should have pulled away. Instead, I just pressed closer. "Good. There's more. The FBI knows you're alive. They want you back in custody. Trial's in 3 weeks. They're demanding I turn you over." My heart stuttered. "What did you tell them?" "No. Simple. Absolute. You're not going back into their system. Not when they can't protect you. Dominic, I have to testify. That's the whole point. If I don't, those men go free and Morrison died for nothing. We'll find another way." His hand tightened on my waist. "I won't lose you again. Not to them. Not to anyone. This isn't sustainable. Hiding here waiting for them to attack. Sooner or later, I know." He stopped moving, looked down at me with eyes that burned. "I know this can't last. I know you deserve better than this life, but I'm selfish enough to want you anyway." My breath caught. "Dominic!" His phone's emergency alert shattered the moment. He pulled it out, read the message, and every line of his body went rigid. "What is it?" "Bratva. 43 men confirmed. 3 miles out and closing fast." He was already moving, pulling me toward the door. "They're coming tonight." The alarm system screamed at 2:37 in the morning. I jolted awake, heart already racing before my brain caught up to what was happening. The sound was different from the tests Dominic had run. This was real. This was them. I was out of bed and grabbing the Glock from my nightstand when the first explosion hit. The entire mansion shook. Glass shattered somewhere below. The lights flickered once, twice. Then emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in red. My door flew open. Dominic stood there in tactical gear, face grim, a rifle in his hands. Blood streaked down from his temple where flying glass had caught him. "You're hurt. It's nothing. Come on." He grabbed my arm, pulling me into the hallway. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Close. Too close. His men were already engaged. We ran toward the east wing, toward the secret passage he'd shown me during the first week. The house was chaos around us. Shouting in Italian and Russian. More explosions. The smell of smoke and cordite burning my throat. He shoved open the door to what looked like a linen closet, revealing stairs leading down. "Go. Now? Not without you. Hannah." His voice was steel. "I can't fight them if I'm worried about you getting shot. Please, I need you safe." Another explosion. Closer this time. The floor beneath us trembled. I could hear footsteps thundering through the halls. Too many of them. They'd breached multiple points. "I'll take position at the entrance." I pulled out the Glock, checked it like he'd taught me. "I won't leave. But I won't be helpless either. Something flashed in his eyes. Not anger. Pride, maybe. Or fear. He nodded once. Stay in cover. Shoot anyone who isn't me or my men coming through that door. I will. We went down the stairs together. The bunker was exactly as he described it. Reinforced concrete walls, supplies for weeks, a single entrance that could be defended by one person if necessary. I took position behind a concrete barrier that gave me clear line of sight to the door, while keeping me mostly protected. Dominic turned to leave. I caught his wrist. Wait. He looked back at me. This man who'd mourned me for 6 months, who'd taught me to shoot and stayed through my nightmares, and looked at me like I was something precious. This man I'd somehow fallen for despite every logical reason not to. I pulled him down and kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't careful. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like fear and gunpowder. His hand came up to cup the back of my head, holding me against him like he was trying to memorize the feeling. Around us, the battle raged. People were dying. But for 5 seconds, there was just this. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Come back to me, I said. I promise. He pressed his forehead to mine. Stay alive, Hannah. That's all that matters. Then he was gone, taking the stairs 2 at a time. And I was alone with the sound of warfare echoing through concrete walls. I lost track of time. Could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours. The gunfire was constant at first, a steady roar punctuated by explosions. I counted each one, prayed after each one that Dominic was still breathing somewhere up there. The Glock was heavy in my hands. I kept my finger off the trigger like he'd taught me, ready, but controlled. Twice, footsteps approached the door. Both times they retreated before reaching it. His security was holding, barely, but holding. Then, gradually, the shooting began to slow. The explosions stopped. The voices faded. Silence crept in to fill the spaces between gunshots, until there was nothing but my own breathing and the hammer of my pulse in my ears. 8 minutes of complete silence. 8 minutes where I didn't know if Dominic was alive or dead, if I should stay hidden or run. If the Bratva had won and were currently searching for me. I aimed the Glock at the door, hands remarkably steady despite the terror coursing through me. The door opened. My finger tightened on the trigger. Then I saw who it was, and nearly dropped the gun. Dominic stood in the doorway, covered in blood and soot, and looking like he'd fought through hell. There was a wound on his left thigh, dark blood soaking through his tactical pants. Another gash across his shoulder, deep enough that I could see it even through torn fabric. But he was upright. He was moving. He was alive. I ran to him, hit him hard enough that he staggered back. His arms came around me immediately, crushing me against his chest hard enough to hurt. I didn't care. You're alive, I said into his neck. You're alive. Told you I'd come back. His voice was rough, exhausted. His hand tangled in my hair. It's over. They're dead or captured. You're safe. I pulled back just far enough to look at him, to see the truth of it in his eyes. Then I kissed him again, harder than before, tasting blood and smoke and survival. His response was immediate and consuming, months of restraint shattering between us. We didn't make it back upstairs, didn't make it anywhere civilized. We crashed together right there against the concrete wall, urgent and desperate and utterly graceless. His hands were everywhere, mine matching his frenzy. This wasn't about romance or seduction. This was about being alive when we'd both come so close to death. When it was over, we stayed pressed together, breathing hard, his weight pinning me to the wall in a way that should have been uncomfortable but just felt safe. I love you. The words escaped before I could stop them. I know it's insane, and we barely know each other, and you're a criminal, and I'm supposed to testify against your world. But I love you. He pulled back enough to look at me, dark eyes searching mine. Say it again. I love you. Again. I love you, Dominic Moretti. He kissed me once more, softer this time. When he spoke, his voice was raw. I loved you from the moment you held my hand in that trauma bay. I loved you through 2 years of searching. I loved you even when I thought you were dead. His thumb traced my cheekbone. You're mine, Hannah. Always have been. I'm yours. We stayed like that until reality intruded in the form of footsteps on the stairs. One of his men appeared, tactfully averting his eyes. "Boss, FBI is 10 minutes out. We have 14 Bratva prisoners. 9 of our men dead, 12 wounded. Volkov escaped, but he's hit. Left a blood trail." Dominic's whole demeanor shifted, became the boss again. "Get the wounded medical attention. Secure the prisoners. Have our lawyer en route." He looked at me. "We need to move. The FBI will want you." "I have to testify." I straightened my clothes, tried to look like I hadn't just fallen apart. "That's non-negotiable. The trial is in 3 weeks. If I don't show up, those men walk free, and Morrison died for nothing." His jaw clenched. "I'm not letting them take you into protective custody. Not after this. Then we negotiate." I touched his face, making him look at me. "We find a way that keeps me alive and puts them in prison. Together." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once. Together, we emerged from the bunker into dawn light filtering through broken windows. The mansion was destroyed. Bullet holes pocked every wall. Blood stained the marble floors. Bodies were being moved, covered with sheets. His men moved with efficient purpose despite their injuries. In the distance, I could hear sirens. The FBI was coming. The real world was crashing back in, demanding answers and justice and consequences. But as Dominic's hand found mine, our fingers interlacing, I knew we'd face it together. Whatever came next, we'd survived the worst. We'd survived each other. The FBI arrived with enough firepower to start their own war. 8 black SUVs, 2 tactical vans, and more armed agents than I could count. Special Agent Catherine Walsh stepped out of the lead vehicle, surveying the destruction of Dominic's mansion with cold efficiency. Bullet holes pocked every surface. Bodies were still being covered. The morning sun illuminated carnage that would take weeks to clean up properly. She found us in what used to be Dominic's office, surrounded by his lawyers and enough legal documents to fill a truck. I'd changed out of my blood-stained clothes into something Maria had brought me, but I still felt the weight of the battle on my skin. "Miss Carter." Walsh's tone was carefully neutral. "You're alive, and you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, fleeing federal custody, and associating with known criminals." Dominic's hand tightened on mine. His lawyer, Victoria Strand, stepped forward before either of us could respond. She was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back severely and eyes that could cut glass. "My client is willing to cooperate fully with the Bureau. However, we have terms." Walsh's eyebrow rose. "Your client doesn't get to make terms. She fled Witsec, got an agent killed, and has been living with a known crime boss for 3 weeks. Morrison's death wasn't her fault," I said, finding my voice. "Your leak got him killed. Your compromised system nearly got me killed. And without me, your case against the Bratva falls apart completely." Victoria nodded approvingly. "Miss Carter is correct. Those 8 men you arrested 6 months ago walk free without her testimony. Sergei Volkov continues operating unchecked. And Morrison's sacrifice means nothing. The standoff lasted 3 hours. We sat in Dominic's destroyed office while Victoria negotiated like a gladiator in a courtroom, laying out exactly what we wanted. Protection for me that didn't involve the compromised Witsec system. Limited immunity for Dominic's cooperation in capturing Volkov. Guarantee that after I testified, I'd be free to live my life without federal supervision hanging over my head forever. What we offered in return was substantial. Dominic's intelligence network had tracked Volkov to a safe house in the industrial district. He was wounded from the battle, weakened, and desperate. The kind of desperate that made men dangerous, but also careless. Dominic would help them set a trap using his resources and knowledge of Volkov's remaining contacts. I would be the bait that drew him out. Walsh wanted to refuse. I could see it in the tension of her jaw, the way her fingers drummed against her tactical vest. But she also knew we had leverage she couldn't match. Without me, months of investigation evaporated. Without Dominic's help, Volkov would disappear into whatever hole the Bratva had prepared for emergencies. The agreement was signed at dawn, witnessed by federal attorneys and Dominic's legal team. I had 72 hours to prepare for the operation that would end this permanently. Dominic's backup safe house became Operation Headquarters. It was smaller than the mansion, but just as secure, tucked into a residential area where armed guards would have attracted attention. FBI agents worked alongside his men with the kind of tension that came from natural enemies forced into cooperation. I watched them circle each other like wolves, maintaining careful distance, never quite turning their backs. I spent those 3 days being wired, briefed, and taught how to leave a digital trail that Volkov's people could follow without making it obvious. Agent Walsh ran me through scenarios until I could recite my cover story in my sleep. I was Hannah Carter, desperate and alone, trying to broker a deal for my permanent disappearance in exchange for destroying the evidence I had against the Bratva. "You need to sell it," Walsh said during one of our practice sessions. "Volkov's smart, paranoid. If he smells a trap, he disappears and we lose our chance. I can sell it." I met her eyes. "I've been selling being someone else for 8 months. I know how to lie convincingly." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite respect, but acknowledgement. "Morrison said you were stronger than you looked." I'm starting to see what he meant. The mention of Morrison hurt. It would always hurt. But it also reminded me why I was doing this. The nights were harder than the days. Dominic would find me on the balcony of the safe house, staring at city lights, and trying not to think about all the ways the operation could go wrong. "You don't have to do this." He stood behind me the night before, close enough that I could feel his warmth. "We can find another way." "There is no other way." I turned to face him. "This ends tomorrow, one way or another. And I need it to end, Dominic. I need to stop running." His hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone with the gentleness that always surprised me from someone so dangerous. "If anything happens to you, it won't. You'll be there." I caught his wrist, pressed a kiss to his palm. "You've protected me this far. I trust you to finish it." We didn't sleep that night. Just held each other in the dark, memorizing the feeling in case tomorrow took it all away. The warehouse district was exactly as bleak as I'd imagined. Rusted metal buildings stretched for blocks, windows broken or boarded up, concrete stained with decades of industrial waste. The transmitter hidden under my jacket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The wire taped to my ribs itched, but I couldn't scratch it without giving away that I was being monitored. I met the intermediary at noon, in an abandoned office building 3 blocks from the Target warehouse. A thin man with nervous eyes who kept checking his phone every 30 seconds. I played my part well, pretending to negotiate terms for my disappearance. Pretending I didn't know every word was being recorded by FBI surveillance. He left after 20 minutes. The trap was set. Now we waited. Volkov took the bait 6 hours later, exactly as Dominic had predicted. I was alone in the warehouse office when the doors burst open with enough force to tear them off their hinges. 18 men flooded in, weapons drawn and ready, and there, in the center of the formation, was Sergei Volkov himself, older than his photos, with graying hair and cold blue eyes that assessed me like a problem to solve. The bullet wound in his side was poorly bandaged, fresh blood seeping through his expensive shirt. Hannah Carter. His accent was thick, Russian consonants harsh. "You've caused me considerable trouble." I kept my hands visible, kept my voice steady. "Funny. I was going to say the same about you." He smiled without humor. Brave words from a dead woman. "Tell me, how did you survive Montana? My people were very thorough. Your people were amateurs compared to Agent Morrison's training." "Not entirely a lie. I've been surviving your attempts to kill me for 8 months. I'm tired of it. So you want to make a deal." He circled me slowly, predator assessing prey. "You want to disappear. Start a new life somewhere your testimony can't reach my people. I want to live. That's all. Whatever it takes." His hand moved faster than I expected, grabbing my jaw hard enough to hurt. "And if I simply kill you here, end this problem permanently, then you lose your insurance." I forced the words out despite his grip. "I have copies of everything. Photos, testimony, locations. If I don't check in every 12 hours, it all goes to every news outlet on the East Coast." It was a bluff, but it was a good one. He released me, stepped back, considered, then nodded to one of his men. "Search her." My heart hammered as rough hands patted me down. They found the transmitter immediately, found the wire. Volkov's expression darkened. "FBI." He spat the word like a curse. "You stupid girl. You think they'll protect you? The windows exploded inward as Dominic's men and FBI agents breached simultaneously from 4 different entry points. Gunfire erupted from every direction, deafening in the enclosed space. I dove behind a metal desk as bullets punched through walls like paper. The chaos was absolute. Smoke grenades filled the warehouse with choking gray clouds. Flashbangs disoriented Volkov's men. I stayed low, hands over my head, trying to become as small a target as possible. Through the smoke and confusion, I saw Dominic. He moved with lethal precision, each shot deliberate and final. His men coordinated seamlessly with FBI tactical teams despite their mutual distrust. They were professionals, and right now they shared a common goal. Volkov's forces were being cut down systematically. I counted bodies falling, heard screams cut short. This was what Dominic's world really looked like. Not the mansion or the quiet dinners, but this. Blood, and violence, and death. Then I saw the sniper. He was on the catwalk above, rifle trained downward, following Dominic's movements, waiting for the perfect shot. Dominic hadn't seen him. No one had seen him in the chaos. My body moved before my brain caught up. I lunged forward, screaming his name. Dominic! Above! I hit him hard enough to knock him sideways. The shot rang out, impossibly loud. Something hot and sharp sliced across my shoulder as the bullet ricocheted off metal pipes behind us. Pain bloomed, but it was distant, unimportant. We were alive. Both of us were alive. Dominic rolled, came up firing. 3 shots in rapid succession. The sniper fell from the catwalk, hit the concrete with a wet thud. Then Dominic turned to where Volkov was trying to escape through a side exit, moving fast despite his wound. Their eyes met across the warehouse floor. No words, just acknowledgement that this was the end of a war that had cost dozens of lives. Dominic's shot took him in the chest. Volkov went down. Stayed down. The FBI arrested 12 survivors. Walsh herself zip-tied them while reading rights in a voice like ice. I spent 4 hours in a hospital getting the gash on my shoulder cleaned and bandaged. Superficial, the doctor said. The bullet's ricochet had only caught me with a metal fragment, not the bullet itself. I'd been incredibly lucky. Dominic never left my side. Not during the hospital stay. Not during the FBI debriefing that lasted until midnight. Not during the endless paperwork that followed as Victoria negotiated the final terms of our agreement. 3 weeks later, I stood in federal court and testified for 5 days straight. I walked the jury through everything. The massacre in the hospital parking lot, the photos I'd accidentally taken, the faces of the men who'd executed 6 people like it, meant nothing. I answered every question the prosecution asked, stayed calm under cross-examination, and never once looked at the defendants. Volkov, recovering from surgery in a federal medical facility, took a plea deal on day 3. Facing death penalty, he gave up names and locations and enough information to dismantle the Bratva's East Coast operation entirely. All 8 defendants were convicted. Life sentences for 6 of them. Death penalty for 2. I walked out of that courtroom a free woman for the first time in nearly a year. 6 months after that, I woke up in Dominic's arms in a penthouse overlooking the city. My city. The one I'd thought I'd lost forever. My new life had emerged from the ashes of the old one. I worked at a private medical clinic now, discreet and well-paying, catering to people who needed medical care without questions. Some of them were probably Dominic's people. I didn't ask. Dominic was slowly, painfully legitimizing his business interests. It was a process measured in years, not months, but he was trying. For me, for us, for a future that might actually last. Wednesday morning found us at Oak Hill Cemetery, as dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Early enough that morning, mist still clung to the ground like ghosts. Dominic placed fresh white roses on the grave that had never held a body, just as he'd done every Wednesday for over a year now. "Why do you still come here?" I asked, my hand warm in his. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the stone that bore my name and dates that marked a death that hadn't happened. Because this is where everything changed. Where I got a second chance I didn't deserve. His eyes met mine, dark and steady. Where we started becoming real instead of just surviving. I leaned against him, feeling solid and alive and possible. The future stretched before us. Uncertain, but ours. Where do we go from here? Anywhere you want. He kissed the top of my head, then my temple, then my lips, soft and sure. As long as it's together. We walked out of the cemetery hand in hand, leaving behind the ghost I'd been and the man he'd mourned. The life we'd built was complicated and probably dangerous, and definitely not what either of us had planned, but it was ours. Hard-won and fierce and absolutely real.